Yeah, I think the issue that we're focusing on is take-home exam. The reason being is that many colleagues add sit-down examination as the most common type, with obviously a very limited number of take-home exams across the university. And we also understand there were some colleagues who had online assessments. But now with COVID-19, it has just become a huge demand. And we just want to just reflect on what is the take-home exam kind of understanding. The point of a take-home exam is to give the student a chance to show the understanding of the subject beyond what anyone can look up in a book, right? It allows the student to focus the studying on meaning and or application rather than rote memorization. A take-home exam requires a genuine understanding of the material to be able to interpret, think critically, and present an organized and well-written answer. I mean, we don't want to give a take-home exam to ask questions which a student can just Google and get the answers. We really want to see some thinking. So the take-home exam is, in the normal sense, is focusing on a higher order, middle to higher order kind of questions. So important in this is how do we measure the authenticity of the student's response, and how do we kind of invoke uniqueness and novelty in both in the design of the question and also trying to get the creativity, the analysis, and the critical thinking coming from the student. And obviously, the questions can be designed to demonstrate problem solving, critical and evaluative skills as well. Important is the flexibility of the design of the question. It should be designed to integrate a variety of skills and competencies, and not just to one skill in the student's performance. It is quite comparable to like a capstone task, And the important thing here is to uphold the quality and rigor. And not to say that the students are given this task, which is representing an exam kind of thing, that here goes the quality and rigor out of the door, I think many of you are quite familiar with rubrics, but I just thought, that we basically have two kinds of rubrics, the holistic rubric and the analytical rubric. The holistic rubric basically just gives you an holistic view on the student's performance. And basically you can have your marks there and what is the description levels and how are you going to gauge the student that belongs to that particular level. And so you will have a broad description of what are the competencies that you're looking for overall. You can use this for some tasks, particularly the smaller weighted tasks, etc. But I will send you the presentation and the PowerPoint as well, okay? But then comes the analytical rubric, which I think is more important if you're really looking to discriminate students from the low end to the top end in a fair way. And important about the rubric is the students are given the rubric upfront and I explain how it will work. And so normally, this was a rubric that I designed for one of my courses. On the left-hand side, you see the column there, which basically indicate what are the key criteria that I'm going to focus on when I'm giving the students a task. I'm looking at, can they understand the problem, isn't it? And can they then design and build a model? And can they use a model to solve the problem? And can they look back and interpret the answers, see if it makes sense? And of each of those criterion, we have the level descriptors. And you can create the level descriptors in a graded way. And for each one, you need to be very clear what is the sub criteria that will qualify that descriptor level, you see. So when you give the students 5 marks, the students clearly know why he's got 5 marks or why he's got 0 marks, etc. And you get a score and you build up your rubric like that. But there are many different ways of doing the analytical rubric, and we can have a more discussion on that. But some thoughts about the take-home exam. Normally we'd give a student an exam, a sit-down exam, he writes for 3 hours and then it's done. We have been doing take-home exams quite some time now in the Faculty of Education. Some colleagues give 24 hours, depending on the nature of the take-home exam. Some colleagues give 48 hours. Some give a week and some give 2 weeks, you understand, depending on the level and the program as well. We recommended that the date that you see on the exam timetable is the date that the student will submit the take-home exam. So if the date is on the 30th of June to submit a particular module, MAE 111, for example, then if you gave the student a day, then he'll submit it the day before. If you gave him 2 days, and you work backwards, and you gave him a week, you'll give this, you'll give the item to the student a week before the due date. You understand? And if it's 2 weeks, you give the students the item to do 2 weeks before the exam date that's shown on the timetable. That's a way to manage it, you know? And that's an internal thing. The take-home exam is actually managed internally by the faculty. We had the traditional take-home exam where I said to you, you'll design the task and you give it to the students. But now the COVID aspect, many of the colleagues who were doing the sit-down exam are very anxious about, this take-home exam. What's its authenticity? Will students copy? How do we moderate and modulate students' performance? So we kind of propose that, particularly those who are coming from the sit-down exams, even in mathematics as well, that you could have two parts to this examination that you want. The first part could be a section A, which can be done in an online environment, but the kinds of questions that you ask there we will talk about. But if you're asking multiple choice questions, then it'll be a set of randomized multiple choice questions so that all students don't have the same kind of answers that they must put forth. For example, if you're testing the principle of 3 times 4, right? You could ask in one question 3 times 4, the next question 2 times 3, and the next question 1 times 8. So you're testing the same principle, but the answers are varying. So students won't copy it necessarily. If they do copy, then they get the wrong answer, you know. So we need to build that, and CICT has got a lot of expertise in doing that, and you can do that. And then we also have completion type of questions, and I'll go more in detail in that. But I think working in an online environment, you need to allow for more working on online space. You need to consider the students in real time. In other words, you may be quite competent in using online facilities, etc. But students are novices in that, you know, and even some of the staff members are novices in that. So you need to allow and build in some extra time for the students, compensation time, you know, for working in an online environment. And we suggest that these tasks don't be very long, 30 to 45 minutes. And if you want to have it longer, then rather have 2 sessions split, you know, so that if something happens on the system, it's not too huge a task to go back and redo, you know. And then the section B to that. And so the section A can, you know, be your objective part, etc. And you can give it whatever weighting you want to. And section B can be a part where the students take away and either do it 1 or 2 days or a week or 2. And obviously you can consider using Turnitin wherever possible. But I think with regard to take-home exams, I'm just giving this broad taxonomy, and you may use different taxonomies. But I think in take-home exams, we are going to focus more on the higher order and the top end of the middle order thinking skills. I mean, we don't want to test really remembering, you know, and even the lower aspects of understanding, because those things can be done without much work. But I think this is what we should be able to do when we're looking at our take-home exams, is that we should bear in mind the level at which the students are in the program and the NQF level, which is very, very important, and the cognitive demand of the task. Now, if you see there, what we are basically saying is that as the NQF level increases, the extent to which you increase the higher order questions also increases, you understand? So we should not find a case where you're dealing with NQF level 8 and bulk of your items are in middle order, you see. It's rather bulk of your items should be on the higher order, you know. So that's a guide that we kind of discussed. And then we have the solo taxonomy. And there's lots of this on the website, and we have a lot of examples of this. And those of you who want some examples of how to use the solo taxonomy, we can share that. Right? And that's the the pyramid for the solar taxonomy. So rather, we are talking about multi-structural, rational, and extended abstract. That's where we're talking about the take-home exam being pivoted, I explained this to you, right? Okay. So the take-home and online, you can have the online part, you can have objective items, could include multiple choice, matching true or false, yes or no, or short answers. And obviously that's recall of information and ability to discriminate, obviously through analysis and some more thinking. And particularly multiple choice questions. I mean, with multiple choice questions, we can ask higher order and analytical types of questions. And that's why designing multiple choice questions is very, very important. The assertion or reason questions. These questions consist of an assertion and supporting explanation. The learner has to decide whether the assertion and explanation are true, and if it is true, whether the explanation is valid for the assertion. One possible use is to assess the learner's ability to weigh up options and to discriminate. And that obviously involves a lot of thinking, And then we have the essay response items. These items require students to demonstrate understanding of a context or a situation or a problem or a scenario, and through engaging with higher order reasoning, provide a coherent, structured response that brings out the student's own critical voice and creative thinking. And then we have case studies. A case study is a description of an event concerning a real life or simulated situation, usually in the form of a paragraph or text, a video, a description of the picture for the blind or caption for the deaf, a picture or role play exercise. This is followed by a series of instructions to elicit responses from students. Individuals or small groups may undertake case studies. And it's about analyzing situations, drawing conclusions, and drawing up reports, And then those are particular skills, And then obviously using particular sources, using evidence from sources to build an argument or assertion. And here is a kind of rubric that can be used for that kind of task, with your criteria on the left-hand side, and you have your levels and how you discriminate in your levels. And you can say level 1 not achieved, and you can give a range of percentage there to say between 0 to 40%, and level 2 partially achieved between 41 to 49, and level 3 achieved between 50 to 74, and level 4 outstanding between 75 to 100. And you can create more levels if you want, right? And then we have projects. The project is any exercise or investigation in which the time constraints are more relaxed. They're practical, comprehensive, and open-ended, and tackled with close supervision, but with assessor guidance and support. Projects can involve individuals or a group of students. The assessor directs the choice of the project, usually by providing the student with a topic or brief investigation. And here we're looking at comprehensive range of skills and integration of activities. So it gives students the opportunity to investigate features of major economic systems, compare them with South African system, and critically discuss individuals' role in the economy, particularly towards addressing the gaps in SA economy. This is a project that we could give in EMS in our faculty, because our students do economics, etc. And if you give that to them, then there's a rubric that can be used to assess it. The presentation and language, discussion of the major economic systems, the description of individuals' role in the local economy, the comparison of economic systems within that of South Africa. And this is totally an analytical rubric, you see. And we have the levels there, and you can allocate whatever scores you want to these levels, So it doesn't mean the student is level 4 year. It'll be level 4 year. It could be level 4 then, it could be level 1 year, isn't it? In discussing of major economic systems. And when it comes to description of individuals' role of the economy, it could be at level 2, you see. And comparing, it could be at level 3. So you kind of have different levels within the same task the student can be performing, depending on which criteria you're looking at. So you will not be at the same level for all criteria. That's important. And then you have simulations, I think, which applies largely to your faculty. Simulation may actual activities or conditions. They are suitable for assessments where demonstrations and observation will provide reliable and valid results, but where for a number of reasons it is difficult or not practical to assess under actual conditions. I want to exit the screen and just show you a few examples. Yeah, this is an assignment on child development, right? It follows the same kind of thing like a take-home exam. with the instructions very clear. And you say, yeah, this is a group assignment, 4 to 5 students per group. No assignments from single students will be accepted. I mean, assignments, and you give the technical details, etc. And please reference the source of information in text, reference, and list. Be wary of plagiarism, etc. Right? And you say refer to more than one reference source, not only the prescribed textbook. Right? And in 5, you say justify your answers with references. Now, this was on Vygotsky's social cultural theory, right? And we say evaluate the following statement in relation to Vygotsky's theory. Language and thinking are independent of each other. The one does not influence the other. And obviously you have a rubric to mark this, right? But here is one that applies to maths as well. It says John is in grade 3. He is making satisfactory academic progress, but is presently finding it difficult to understand how to subtract single digit and double digit numbers, right? So you're posing them a case, right, in the form of a problem, which they must read and understand. And then you're asking them to design a maths activity that demonstrates Vygotsky's ZPD, right? That's the main task. And you're guiding them how to do the task. Right? Firstly, explain what ZPD means, right? Next, ensure that you explain in detail how you've identified what John can do on his own, right? Next, explain in detail how and what will be done when working in John's ZPD with regard to assisting him in overcoming his maths problem. Then explain how you'll determine when John has passed through the ZPD successfully. So you can see that that question is invoking the higher order spectrum of cognitive demand, you know, and you'll have a rubric to mark that. So it's not just rote learning. I mean, what is ZPD, you see? And then there's another question here about fluent science theory on immediate learning experience. Evaluate the following statement in terms of fluent science theory. A mentally retarded child cannot really learn basic self-care skills. All that can be done is for a child is to ensure that his basic care needs are provided for throughout his life. Ensure you refer to key concepts of fluent science theory and apply these concepts when evaluating the statement. And then we ask them to choose any FP lesson activity in any FP subject, in any FP grade. Now that, if you look at that part, you're not specifying which lesson, you're not specifying which subject and which grade. So you have variation of choice. So the likelihood of students copying from each other is very minimal. And if they do, it will be very rare. There will be some differences in the answers. So you need to design the questions that allow a freedom of choice, and so that you don't limit them to a particular piece of work in terms of that. So the questions need to be carefully thought about. Make sure you clearly indicate the FP grade, etc., and so forth, right? In your planning of the lesson activity, indicate how you'll ensure that the 3 most important criteria for immediate learning experiences, namely intentionality and reciprocity, meaning and transcendence, will be applied during the delivery of the lesson activity. You have to clearly describe what you're going to do, what resources you're going to use, and why you have chosen the resources, and which aspects of the lesson task delivery will reflect those 3 parts. Using the same lesson activity you developed in the previous question, explain clearly how you're going to ensure that any 2 cognitive functions during the input phase will be nurtured in the learners. Now do the same for each of the other 2 phases, namely the elaboration and the output phase. And so forth. And you can continue with that kind of questions, right? And obviously we have a case study here as well, where the students have to read the following case study and answer that particular question. I just want to go to one more example and then I close. Nici, okay. I'm going to go through all of this. Can you see this? Simone, can you see this?
Yes, Raj, we can see it.
Yeah, I just got a few questions here. According to Shriman, specializing and generalizing are two processes that are central to mathematical activity. Briefly define the process of specializing and generalizing from a mathematical perspective, right? Now, after considering a suitable example associated with a topic that is specialized in the TVET maths curriculum, illustrate the process of that. Now, here, once again, the question is quite open. You're not limiting them to a particular topic. And so the likelihood of students copying from each other is once again minimal. You see. And then you look at discovery learning. You probably kind of give them an explanation of what discovery learning is about. And in your own way, explain why we should support discovery learning in our mathematics classroom. And that's a kind of open kind of response. Design a discovery lesson that lends itself to the use of either geometry sketchpad or GeoGebra. In particular, the design of the task should be underpinned by constructive learning theory and enable learners in your class to gain the necessary knowledge and skills associated with the topic that you select from the TVET maths curriculum. In your write-up, you should do the following. Now, the nature of the question, once again, is not restricting the students. It's quite open, and they can choose whatever topic they want. And then you say here, in 2.2, in no more than 3 pages, discuss the constructive learning theory which underpins the design of your discovery task, you see. And present the discovery task with all the necessary details. Provide possible expected answers. And in no more than a type page, briefly discuss how you would facilitate the discovery in your classroom. And then we're looking at Polya. I think many of you know about Polya. It's phases of problem solving in terms of understanding and designing a model and solving the model and then reflecting. You give them a problem to do. This is quite, it looks easy, but it's quite involved, and you give them another problem to do. It's quite, and the responses here would be varied because they need to use their own strategies. And then you also have another question on modeling, where I define the 4 steps, and you give them a thing like this, and you think it's easy, but they have to figure the number of grapes in the bowl and also the amount of space occupied by the grapes. And the answers could vary here, and you get different answers. And I say for each case, it is essential that you state all your assumptions about the situation and what mathematics you are using as a result of your assumptions. In the main, you should build a mathematical model, solve your model, and interpret your answer for each case. Now, this was a question on statistics, right? So I just got one more to show you, and then, sorry. Take home exam. Yeah, I just want to show you the rubric. Okay, can you see the rubric? Simone?
Yes, Raj.
Yeah, so this is the task I just showed you just now. This is the holistic rubric, you know what I mean? Where you're giving a particular range of marks, and you're saying this is where the student is, and you clearly describe why the student is in that. For example, student's performance does not satisfy the requirements of the task, lacking in many respects, many issues inadequately dealt with, only 1 or 2 aspects are covered superficially. And a student who's got this mark, student's performance exceeded the requirements of the task, shows comprehensive coverage of all the relevant aspects of the task. Okay, so that's that. And then the next question could have been marked using that. But there's the problem-solving rubric, you know, with all the 4 criteria, clearly 5 criteria, in fact, and each one is clearly discriminated through the level descriptors, you understand? I wouldn't bore you with going through this, but if you read through each one, you can see that going from the left, right to left, I don't know why I wrote it like that, but from the highest to the lowest, you can see how I differentiate between the students in that category. And similarly, I have for each of the problem-solving rubrics, each of the problems, I got a problem-solving rubric. And then for the modeling task, I also have a modeling rubric, you see. So when students get the marks, they know why they got the marks, you see. But obviously, you give more detailed feedback on the script itself, you know. And so, yeah, so I will stop there. I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks, Raj. Raj, do you think that you could answer a few questions, or should we hold that
I
until
think
the end?
I think should hold until the end because the last time after Samuel presented, I mean, there was lots of commonalities as well.
Okay,
So
no,
we
that's
probably could
fine.
answer all the questions at the end. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great.
I will send the PowerPoints through. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Sam, you can go. Yeah.
Can you just,
Okay.
yeah, there you go. Okay, good morning, colleagues. My presentation is going to focus more on assessment design. Actually, it builds on Raj's presentation. And so I'm going to focus actually on three aspects of assessment design. First of all, you will see, those of you who attended my session with the Faculty of Law will see the first one is a bit different because I've received an email this week on students that are cheating in online tests. So I've decided, all right, let's make that a starting point and have a look at the relationship between cheating and the assessment design. It's very interesting, referring to Raj's presentation, believe it or not, open book exam test higher on validity and reliability than a sit-down pen and paper exam. So that is, and hopefully that will become clear in this presentation. And then one way to reduce cheating in assessment is to use alternative assessments. But it's not only using alternative assessment, it's got to do how you align and sequence your alternative assessment. So I've tried to look at this module, physiotherapy. I'm not sure if the colleague is in the audience, but I want to congratulate module is, Prof. de Jong, module is well structured. And I'm also going to illustrate that as well, and also make use of a lot of alternative assessments. So it was quite easy to customize my presentation within the context of this module. And then I will end off looking at alignment and sequencing of assessment is what must be done and how to make it happen. So what I do is I use blueprinting, and actually that also builds on Raj's presentation. Right, let's go back to the email that I received from this colleague, and I think that is something that we all experience at the moment. Is students see a gap online and they try to cheat and copy and paste and so forth, and that was the complaint of this colleague. And as you said, it's very difficult, especially online assessments, how to quality assure the assessments. But there's a way. There's a way to deal with this. So this presentation is not about cheating. It's more about looking at the validity and reliability of assessments. So very interesting, as I mentioned, there's a relationship between cheating and mode of delivery, or not. Interesting, according to the most recent survey, that students enrolled in online classes were less likely to cheat than the so-called on-campus assessments. So that was for me very interesting in terms of, because we think there's a perception that, okay, online assessment is not reliable. We'd rather wait for the students when they come back, when we have a controlled venue-based assessment. so that we can watch them while they are assessing. But according to the most recent research is that that's not the case. So we can invest in online teaching, and we can invest and we can utilize online assessment for our students as well. There was a big Australian research project. Over 14,000 students participated and responded, as well as more than 1,000 educators, lecturers, and according to this research, there's a very strong relationship between cheating and the assessment design. Actually, I want to interpret this in terms of there's a very strong relationship between the validity and reliability of assessment and the assessment design. All right. Contract cheating, that was also very interesting for me. And I know this are happening, colleagues. People are paying other people to write their thesis for them and so forth. But as I said, there's a lot of cheating that's going on, and there's a way to deal with it. And I'd like to approach this from a different point of view, because I expect, as higher education, especially now with COVID-19 and so on, that we are going to teach and assess more frequently online, even after COVID-19. And I expect that there's going to be a lot of policies in terms of assessment policies, looking at cheating and so forth. And it's very interesting, from 1992, especially with the introduction of outcome-based education, there's a lot of, if you look at the philosophy of assessment policies, it tells you what the students must not do, rather than what they must do. And this is the approach. Do not focus on rules and regulations, but try to be more innovative addressing assessment problems. So there are ways that we can reduce cheating. According to research, as I mentioned, there's a very strong relationship between cheating and student engagement, student activity, if the students are active in the class. So those students who are cheating, they were most probably not very active in the learning process. So the way to address this is to focus on active learning approaches, making learning more social, and then provide time, and then also involve the student in the assessment, for example, using self-assessment approaches. So according to this model, all I want to emphasize here is, and Raj explained to us the taxonomies and the classification systems and so forth. And it's also related to student engagement. So when you look at, for example, according to this learning model, with the factual information, low cognitive levels and so forth, so the students are passive. But when you move up, and this is also very clear in this physiotherapy module, the students are very active. There's a lot of practicals, there's a lot of demonstrations. Students are learning from experience, the experiential learning theory and so forth, the assessment of performance. So students are active. So you can expect that at the bottom here, the students are not active, and they will tend to cheat on this level. It's very easy to cheat, is copy and paste on this level. But when you move up in terms of the in this learning model, when the students are active, it's very difficult for them to cheat. for example, the performance-based, they need to demonstrate orals, portfolios, and so forth. It's very difficult to teach. The open book exam falls into this category. And that's why it's very difficult, and I will illustrate that as well. So when you look, for example, in Miller's pyramid, in terms of a learning model, say on this level, on the cognition level, especially the reproduction of information, fact gathering, multiple choice questions, essay questions, testing the remembering, the memory of the students. High in reliability, that's why we like these tests, because it's reliable, but low in validity. Low in validity, validity means you do not test what you're supposed to test. And that's with a sit-down exam. Sit-down exam, summative sit-down exam has a place, but especially in CHS context and in dentistry context, that's performance-based, workplace-based. You cannot assess all the necessary essential types of knowledge and skills. So, and then when you move up in this pyramid, for example, demonstration of learnings, the OSCEs, the workplace-based assessment, performance-based assessment, open book assessments, and so forth, high in validity and high in reliability as well. So important to reduce cheating, keep the students engaged, strong relationship with teaching, and strategies to increase the reliability and the validity of assessment is aligning and sequencing alternative assessment tasks to facilitate a progressive build-up of knowledge and skills. If you ask me, what is your definition of continuous assessment? And there's a difference between continuous assessment and continual assessment. Continual assessment is a linear. So you've got two tests and they do not build up on each other. So there's not a progressive build-up. That's continual assessment. But we make use of continuous assessment. And in continuous assessment, you need to structure your assessment in such a way it facilitates a progressive build-up of knowledge and skills. And I'm going to try to illustrate. And that helps to make this, to engage the student in the learning process. So this brings us to the second topic, is to align and sequencing of alternative assessment. I'm going to use this module as an example. So looking at this module, and congratulations to this colleagues, this colleague, a wonderful illustration of how she aligned teaching, learning, and assessment with the outcomes and the graduate attributes. And she also made use of criterion reference assessment. We see the presentation of rubrics, and that itself also increase rather the validity and reliability of assessment. So compliments, congratulations to the colleague. Well done. Alignment, making use of integrated assessment. And this is a good example to illustrate how to sequence and structure your assessment towards a progressive build-up of knowledge and skills. And actually, just what I want to try to add to this module is not only, and this is my contribution to this colleague, is not only alignment in terms of teaching, learning, and assessment, but also alignment of the different levels. Raj referred to the classification system. This is the solo taxonomy, solo observed structured learning, and we need the solo taxonomy, solo structured observed learning outcome to structure the learning and to structure the assessment according to the learning. So actually what I do is I'm using these levels, the unistructural, multistructural, relational, extended abstract. I use these levels to structure not only the learning and teaching, but also the assessment. And this is how we manage to design and align and sequence our assessment in such a way that it engages the student from in the learning from simple to complex. And this is the most pertinent point of this presentation. If we can understand this, you will have no problem to structure your assessment according to the continuous assessment system. All right, aligning your teaching and learning, and this is for according to Atkinson, your assessment design. What do we need to take in consideration when you design your assessment? There's a social context, there's a personal context, and we need to respect this colleague. She's got her own professional signature. She's got her own professional context, her own idea, how she thinks, how she teach, and we need to acknowledge that. Then there's a discipline context, and then there's the student profile. There are media choices that we need to take into consideration, and then the learning outcomes, and then the assessment design, design of the teaching, learning, and assessment, and the module evaluation. So aligning and sequencing of alternative assessment tasks is a bit more than just aligning with the learning outcomes. There's a lot of contextual factors that we need to take in to consideration. And if we're going to design it online, the same principles apply. So alternative assessment in the classroom, good alternative assessment practices, activities in the classroom can be converted towards online assessment. And we use the same processes, the same procedures to align, to develop your online assessment activities. Not too much about this, but as I mentioned, there are a lot of contextual factors, and it was very interesting in Raj's exam paper for the education students. There was a question, if you've noted, you spotted it, Vygotsky, and the social cultural perspective and the social constructive perspective. So when you design your assessment and when you design your assessment activities, you design it from a certain theoretical framework or conceptual framework. So in my presentation here, in my assessment, and this is also the philosophy of most colleagues in dentistry, when you look at the interactive study guides, they approach the teaching and learning from a social constructivist point of view. But I'm not going to say a lot about this, but when we are talking about alternative assessment has also got to do with transformation. It's got to do with constructive action. It's got to do with context, different dimension of knowledge, and so forth. But if you ask me, what is alternative assessment? Alternative assessment is what we call applied integrated competence. It's when we integrate, when we identify and collect content, and we integrate it in a certain real life situation, in a context. And this module, physiotherapy, it's got very good examples of performance-based assessments. So it's applied integrated competence. All right. So the difference between alternative assessment and the traditional assessment, there on your left-hand side, there's a list that you can see. I'm not going into detail. The list between how we distinguish between traditional assessment and alternative assessment. And especially when you look at Raj's presentation and an open book assessment, there's a lot of key elements in alternative assessment that feeds into open book assessment. For example, high quality performance, assessment in real world context. You use a range of knowledge and skills to solve problems, problem-based teaching and assessment as well. And that's why, and actually this is what we are trying to do, is we try to move more towards a qualitative approach of assessment, moving up. Do not focus on content, but rather use the content and integrate the content. Use the content to solve problems. Use the content to integrate it into a real life situation. So that's the whole thing of alternative assessment. And this is the alignment. So actually what we do, applied integrated competence, is when we integrate knowledge and skills. And this is important in terms of sequencing the assessment, because the context, say for example in this module, when you look at the content, there's content and then there's a real life situation, there's context. And content you need to structure. When you look at the topics, for example, the topics in your module, you need to structure it from simple to complex, and context as well. This module, physiotherapy, there's a lot of procedures, there are a lot of practical, so the procedures need to be structured from simple to complex within a context situation, from simple to complex. For example, physiotherapy in the first year, content-wise, context-wise, will be much different than physiotherapy in the third year, content-wise and context-wise. Why? Because it's structured from simple to complex. And that's what we need to take into consideration when we sequence our assessment. And that's why, to keep the students engaged, is you need to structure it so that there's a progressive build-up of knowledge and skills within the context as well. So that's why it's very important that we have a qualitative approach to assessment. Now, when you look at the colleagues, the physiotherapy, what does he assess? Use of rubric. You saw Raj's rubrics. Now, rubrics, you need criteria. You need rubrics to assess the quality of the performance, the quality of performance and the breadth of experience. All right. So that is the focus. So the proficiency, and that's for example, for a physiotherapist, is in the exit modules. The proficiency is embedded in the exit level module. So when we assess, when we structure the assessment, we need to structure it according to how the learning are structured, from simple to complex. And this is the whole thing of integrated assessment. So looking at your assessment, and when you want to structure your assessment, look at the knowledge, the type of knowledge, looking at the skill, the can, and then also, very important in this module that was evident, there's also attitude and values that needs to be assessed, the human being. And that boils down to a competent physiotherapist. So looking at this module in terms of performance-based assessment and how this module is structured, you will see there's performance, types of knowledge, the know and the know-how, and then also skill. And then the last one is the being. So when you want to structure your assessment, look at your learning outcomes and unpack your learning outcomes in skill and in knowledge and in values and attitudes. And then you also need to look at your learning outcomes, the concepts and the complexity of the concepts, so that we can align the complexity of the concepts with the context of the module. So looking at this module, the aligning and sequencing, so you will see in terms of the learning outcomes comparing to the characteristics of alternative assessment, it's fit for purpose. It's a good example of using alternative assessment for this module. All right, so in terms of sequencing, when we look at the learning outcome from this module, say for example, to measure joint range of movement using this meter, I do not know, by demonstrating particular skills in a practical example. So when you look at, for example, Bloom's taxonomy, you can spot on the application level, there's measure as well as demonstrating. And then in terms of sequencing, the prior learning, the learning to be in place is for this lecture very important. You cannot just provide this or design an assessment activity for this learning outcome to give the student to check that the student achieve this learning outcome. So what you need to take in consideration in sequencing the assessment, you should provide the student an opportunity first to describe, for example, joint range of movement, as well as identify. So you need to look in your module guides, how your assessment is structured, the sequencing of your assessment, and you need to align it. You need to take in consideration how students are learning, how students are thinking. So before the student is able to measure and to demonstrate, he should be able to describe. You should be able to identify. And that's the prior learning, the learning assumed to be in place to demonstrate. So sometimes when you give a student an activity, for example, to measure, but he do not understand it, he cannot describe it, then he will have difficulties to measure. And that's why you need to structure your assessment. You need to design assessment activities prior to this, to enable the students to progress, to progress up to this level. Back to Raj, in terms of the solo taxonomy. So when you look at your learning outcomes, I've taken the learning outcomes from this module. There's a learning outcome for identify, there's a learning outcome for describe, and there's a learning outcome for analyze. So what we need to do then is we need to design assessment tasks align with the verb identify, describe, and analyze. You can do it in a case study, but then you need to structure it in a case study. So that there's a progressive build-up. So if you want the students to analyze biochemical factors related to studying that learning outcome, then you need to take in consideration, all right, maybe a baseline assessment, what my students already know and can do. Can they describe the development? Can they identify? So there needs to be a progressive build-up. And this is the aligning and sequencing. And this helps the student to be engaged in the learning process. Right, so aligning on this level, that's no learning is demonstrated, but when you move to the next level, to check can the students recall information. So we can use this learning outcome from this module, identify, and then here you see at the bottom here, appropriate assessment activities or tasks align with the with this learning outcome. All right, so although my learning outcome is I want them to demonstrate, what I will do is I will give them a short answer questions or multiple choice questions or just recall based questions or just true or false questions just to check. Are they able to identify certain structures? Then I will move to the next level just to check their understanding. And there is, for example, a learning outcome for its understanding. for example, describe, and there are appropriate assessment tasks that feeds into this learning outcome that you can use. And this is how we can proceed. So look at your learning outcomes, look how the students are thinking, their understanding, their conceptual progression, and then you need to identify appropriate assessment tasks, appropriate to the learning outcome, appropriate to the context of the topic, and then the creation. All right, so colleagues, this brings us to the last one, is how to make it happen, the blueprinting. I've already illustrated to you. You can use the Solo taxonomy to align and sequence your assessment. So when we look at physiotherapy, there are tests, there are practical tests, they make use of exam, and there's also a practical exam. Right, and I think it's important, looking at this module and the assessment strategy, is the use of test and the use of practical exam, and there's an assignment, is now for this colleague, especially in the continuous assessment mark, the 60%, how are she going to structure the assessment so that there's a progressive build-up, so that my students are fully engaged in the assessment process. There's just a tip or a guide. This module is a 15-credit module, so this is just a guide to make use of 3 to formal assessment tasks. Your test is also an assessment task. Your exam is also an assessment task. All right, so this is just a guide. In terms of the blueprinting, so when you look at this, and this is again the high reliability and high validity, is to identify assessment tasks on the lower level. For example, on this level, to know, for example, you can make use of a multiple choice question or an essay. Then on the next level is the know-how, and then the show-how, and then the does. So actually, it's actually what you want the students to do, and then you design assessment tasks according to. So according to Miller's pyramid, there on your right-hand side are assessment activities aligned with the know level. My take on this, I will use self-assessment and peer assessment on this. Although the validity is high, of the reliability is high, the validity is low. So I will not allocate a lot of weight to this assessment. And then the know-how, more higher cognitive levels, maybe a case-based multiple choice, maybe essay questions, and the show-how, also examples of appropriate assessment tasks that you can do. And in this module, that does, it will be the practical assessment of the students. So to conclude, colleagues, the blueprinting is just to consider, even if you've got 100% continuous formative assessment, is to structure your assessment task according to the cognitive levels or the performance levels, expected levels of performance, and allocate your weight according to the complexity of the content and context. And then on your right hand side, so on this level, the does level will then be the practical of this module. If you consider, for example, an open book, as Ras indicated, you can also structure according to. All right, so that your assessment task is a progressive build-up, and that will challenge the students, and it will challenge the students to stay engaged with the assessment. Then also very important in terms of strengthening the engagement of students is to provide them with what we call JIT, just-in-time feedback. So before the student moves to the next level, before they need to complete the next level of assessment, you need to provide them with feedback so that they can use this information and apply it in the next assessment task. So feedback is also very important in terms of getting students engaged of the assessment. There's the open book, Raj. I mentioned the open book assessment. So the open book assessment will be more on the higher cognitive levels. All the material is available. Students use the content to answer the higher cognitive questions, high in validity and high in reliability as well. And copy and paste does not work here. If the student copy and paste, then this may be a problem with the level of the questions. So again, the feedback very important, keep the student engaged. And this is what we call assessment as learning. Why I mentioned that is the students need to take in consideration that learning online is self-learning. It's a huge difference between learning in the classroom, where it's more an act of collaboration. Learning in the class online is self-learning, self-directed learning, and there's assessment approach for self-learning. It's what we call assessment as learning. And ipsative reference assessment is not where you use a rubric to assess the student's performance, but when you assess the student's previous performance. So when you're comparing feedback with the previous assessment task feedback, and that's what we call feed forward. And this is the most strongest way to keep the students engaged with learning, is the feed forward and the feed up, and not the feedback. So in terms of self-learning, and I think we all in higher education, we have a lot to learn in terms of assessment, self-directed learning, assessment as learning, as well as ipsative reference assessment. All right, so how can we reduce cheating? I don't want to answer that question. I'd rather go for how can we increase the reliability and validity of assessment. Is to keep the students engaged, is to align and sequence alternative assessment to facilitate a progressive build-up of knowledge and skills, and then just-in-time feedback is sort of a flight deck assistance to the students. College, but it's a process. It's about tracking, advising, management, student development. But I'm very positive that in future we are going to take advantage of this to teach online and to assess online. Okay, I'm not sure if there's any questions. Simone?
Great, thank you very much, Samuel and Raj, and thank you to Takwing for sharing his module. For those who have any question, you're welcome to put it in the chat and we will feed that through. But the one question was from Jo-Celene as well as Sue Bassett was, how are higher order competencies assessed of individual students when they are working in a group? Because in health sciences, we already have certain types of rubrics to assess certain competencies, but how do we assess individual students who are working in a group? So that's the one question.
I can Raj add. There are rubrics. The law faculty last week asked the same question. There are rubrics to assess, for example, student participation. But I think in terms of higher order thinking, the assessment of students in groups in higher order thinking is to have a more reflexive approach and ask more reflective type of questions. In group work, in group assessment as well, it's more a cooperative, collective approach. So what you need to do is, personally, I don't think you can assess an individual student in a group in terms of higher order thinking. You can maybe assess the group, but you need to then look at individual assessments to assess the students individually. I will not just use a group assessment to assess higher order competencies. I will use a range of assessments. But a group assessment, there's a purpose of a group assessment, and I don't think you must head into a direction aimed to assess a group assessment, but also in terms of individual. You assess the contribution of the student in the group, but I think you will have difficulties to assess individual higher order thinking. Therefore, you need to use individual assessment. That's my take. I'm not sure, Raj, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, depending on what the group assessment task is, and the students are working the group assessment task, and you clearly have defined criteria for the group assessment task. But if you want to kind of zone in on some particular thing so that you're able to see exactly what the student is also doing in that task which they're working in groups, you can build in one or two additional criteria where students show their critical argument in terms of what other students are saying, and that can be given as a separate piece of work, either a reflective piece of work or a critical debate or a critical argument on what students are raising in earlier parts of the assessment activities. So it is possible to build in 2 additional or 3 additional criteria to monitor that part. So you can have some kind of differentiation the entire group assessment task. And there are group assessment rubrics and individual assessment rubrics that you can find on the net, and it can also be designed.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
Can I just respond to one comment, Simone, of Prof. de Jong, in terms of over-assessment? The way to reduce over-assessment is the sequencing and the progressive build-up. So you do not assess, again, for example, content. If you have already assessed the application if you have already assessed on a higher level, we tend to assess outcomes over and over again. So when you structure the learning and assess according to, when you sequence your assessment, it's a good way to reduce over-assessment.
Yeah, whilst what Lundie is saying is quite correct, but I think we also need to make the paradigm shift. And Samuel spoke about assessment as learning, where the students actually, self-reflect and to establish the goals and move on. And it's important to know that assessment should be used as a vehicle to facilitate and enhance meaningful learning. It should not just be used at the end to evaluate the product, understand? But rather to facilitate meaningful learning. And if you use assessment in that line, then and you design your assessment task in such a way to support that kind of process, then one really doesn't have to worry about whether you're over-testing or under-testing, but rather it serves a dedicated purpose,
Thanks, Raj, for that, and Samuel. I think that is still a process that some needs to go through, because I totally agree that how we have to make that mind shift of how assessment are used for learning. The other thing that I wanted to ask is about feedback. Now, in CHS faculty, we use a lot of case studies, especially in the senior years, because we try to, their final exams are within different case study format modes of having to answer the questions and things like that. But as part of the year, they also do their clinical practice and they hand in case studies. But what happens with they do a case study and then they get regular feedback from the supervisor, and some give more detailed feedback. But at the end of the day, we've experienced that when the students resubmit that case study, it actually becomes the supervisor's case study. They use the feedback, but they use it directly in such a way. And we are still trying to see, do the students learn in that way.
Yeah. If I can, according to research, a good way of feedback is for example, case study, is to provide the students with the model answers, and then ask them to reflect, to compare their responses, their answers with the model answers. And this is how we also enable the students to reflect. I see a comment there in terms of self-directed learning. Self-directed learning, students are reflective and reflect, you reflect and then action. So a good way of feedback is to use the feedback as a powerful learning tool as well. So provide the students with a model answer, ask them to reflect in terms of strengths and weaknesses and their progression. And then you take the next step of action. How are they going to improve on that? So you engage the student in the feedback and make them reflective students as well. And do not just give them feedback and they use the feedback and try to improve on. They need to reflect on the feedback. So you use the assessment as a learning activity, or the feedback as a learning opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Samuel.
The other point to add there is that, remember, we spoke about feedback and feed forward, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's important that when you give the feedback for a particular task and the student does that, it's fine to an extent. But what you should be looking at is that when you design the next task in a sequential kind of trajectory, are you building the student upwards? And are you giving him opportunity to demonstrate that he has utilized the feedback that you provided in the previous task effectively to move forward in terms of the learning path, and the trajectory. So you're building the students always upwards and not downwards.
Okay. Yeah, because what has been done now, that, for instance, the one case study then, which they use for exam purposes, don't get marked by the supervisor. So we want to see how all the feedback that they've received from the 5 patients or clients that they had be used in the final case study as part of the exam.
But do you know that feedback from peers is more beneficial to the students rather than feedback from the supervisor himself? Yeah. Try that out. Try that out. It'll also cut down your workload, but you need to design your rubrics quite succinctly. Yeah.
Okay. They do have tutorials where the peers give feedback, but I think that's a nice tip, Raj. I think that we must investigate that. Yeah.
You must trust the students.
Yes. I take it from you. Thanks for that.
Colleagues, do we want to close? I know that Samuel has to leave.
Yeah, I will give you the PowerPoint, and then the person who's recording can send us the recordings as well.
Yeah, we'll upload to YouTube. Jo-Celene, do you want to have a final word?
No, I want to say thanks very much, Samuel and Raj. I think I always believe in the motto, you're never too old to learn. And I've learned quite a lot just from this short presentation this morning, but it was very powerful. And I think it's something that we can take back and see how we can actually relook at our assessments in the faculty. Thanks very, very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
And stay safe.
Thanks.